Another founder Wisdom Pod, CEO Wisdom Pod with Hunter Bjork, CEO at ISA. I interviewed his VP sales the other day. It was quite interesting. Want to deepen the convo on energy3 and the future of energy. That'll be a really substantial and really a seismic shift that we will see in our future, because if we have limitless energy, and yeah, the zero cost, quite interesting. How do you make a business out of zero cost? But if we do, we could power very powerful technologies like AGI, or we could use nuclear reactor to just fuel the whole civilization and create this world of abundance. So I really want to discuss that with you today, Hunter. But before we do, can you quickly introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about ISA.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. So my name is Hunter Bjork, the CEO and founder of a company called ISA. And our core mission is really to try and help solve our world's energy problem. And when you really boil that down and you kind of boil away all the noise about pollution and emissions, it really comes down to a cost problem. You know, things like solar have been around for almost 100 years now. So when we first built, the very first grid in New York City here in America, solar was around then. So we kind of have this question of, well, why don't we have sustainability today? And the big answer is, well, it's more expensive to purchase renewables than it is to utilize fossil fuels. So for the last century or so of energy production, fossil fuels have dominated industry. But now I think in the general consensus, so everybody's kind of on the same page that we need to move to a more sustainable future. But in order to do that, we have to make renewables less expensive than that of fossil fuels. So while it might be the morally correct decision to make that transition, it can also be a logical one for these large enterprise businesses that are majoritively controlling the majority of infrastructure and energy. So what we do at ISA is we focus on bridging that gap. The main thing that we're focused on right now is the commercialization development of fusion energy, which in a nutshell is the ability to take two atoms, fuse them together to produce electricity in a safe, clean, and sustainable way. And we want to get that out to the world so that people can benefit from it, which would be a lower cost format of energy, which can, again, make it a simpler and more logical decision for large enterprise to change and augment infrastructure and create a sustainable future.
I see all these skyscrapers behind you. These could be giant solar panels. Have the solar panel technology price gone down enough with Moore's law to make that vision feasible? And then just to Tesla power pack style store this energy in their basement and sell it to other buildings near one another. Like that also seems somewhat far-fetched, but it seems less far-fetched than, merging two atoms. And what I mean by far-fetched is not the right word. It's more like moonshot, right? So what do you think about that solution vs the moonshot?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll say this is that a sustainable future is going to require a myriad of different sustainable sources of energy. Not all of those sources of energy are going to be equally as effective. Solar is a great step in the right direction towards building a sustainable future. The big problem that we have with renewables right now is that for the most part, renewables are intermittent, meaning they're only producing energy when nature allows them to do so. So for example, with solar, when the sun is shining, we're producing electricity. When nightfall comes, we have to either have stored that energy somewhere else to access it, or we run the risk of no production of energy. And so because of that intermittency, again, that's where that cost problem comes from. Solar has over time reduced in cost significantly, where we're starting to get where it's competitive, but it's still not there yet. Most of the way that it is competitive today is predicated on incentives. So these things such as carbon credits and tax incentives and packages that the government is putting out to make solar more affordable. But in terms of hard cost, it's still not to the degree where we would need it to be to really have that quick accelerated change. It's not dense enough of an energy source. So again, solar has its place in the market. It needs to be deployed at scale. but it is not going to alleviate the bottleneck in terms of us reaching sustainability quickly.
Think like more R&D just to make the technology more efficient. If it would be skyscraper windows, it would also need to be almost fully transparent. But I can definitely see a very strong use case here. The other question I have is when I think about solar panels, I think about Solar City because Elon Musk is like one of our favorite entrepreneurs, us young guys, a very inspiring dude. But this company is a freaking failure, like they have, failure to a financial point. I think that they very much flopped. I think it's very much stagnant for now. Why would you explain that?
I think again, it just comes down to the cost. Solar historically has not been able to be competitive with something like a natural gas, which is still our cheapest form of energy that we have on the commercial market. And again, solar is built on incentive. Without incentives, solar is not as competitive as a solution as some other renewables can be. So again, solar has its place. That market is going to stay there. It needs to stay there. But as I look into the future, there needs to be a wider mix of sources that are deployed, available to really start to lower that cost and bridge the what we call the green premium gap between a low cost source of clean energy and the energy sources that we have on the market today.
It's just that I feel that energy, the big innovation has already been done, and people do not value energy nowadays. It's like readily available in most countries, in the Western countries, that is. And I feel as a result, it's provided by governments. Also, that's another reason. So I guess you'd have to deal with governments, which I know you are, which is another topic today. But I feel that the incentive for entrepreneurs to start energy companies is less elevated. The capital doesn't seem to be there since the Enron days. I will mention that because Enron was this gigantic company that no one really understood. Failed spectacularly. Do you think this is right? Do you think there's a bunch of money to be made in energy?
I think there's definitely money to be made in energy. In terms of capital, if you look at the markets, especially in the last several years, most industries have been affected negatively or had some negative impact inside their businesses. Energy is one of the only sectors that has continued to grow throughout these economic twists and turns. And the reason is simple, is that energy is a basic human need, just like water or food. And so the need for energy is never going to go away, whether or not people intellectualize that as a priority in their mind. Everyone uses energy, and at the current rate, we consume so much more energy every year that demand continues to skyrocket. So the industry is there. It's thriving. I would say even in terms of capital allocations and sources of capital for energy businesses, they are prevalent and very available. I think some of it is locked up. I mean, if we just take Wall Street, for example, there's over $680 billion sitting in ESG funds right now for sustainable developments. So the capital is there. Now, that's not saying there is enough capital to fully make the transition yet. There needs to be additional capital brought into the space. But I think it is a healthy industry right now in terms of what's available, people getting into it. I will say, though, that getting into the energy business takes a lot more effort than, say, something like getting into software, for example. This is an age-old industry. There's massive conglomerates and companies in the space that own large pieces of the market share. And to just go out and build a new energy company takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of capital, and it takes a lot of effort. So I think that in looking at people coming into the space, again, healthy, lots of opportunity, the capital is there, but this is something that takes a lot of time to get something new to market or to participate in this space. But I do think we need more people participating and building companies in energy, and we do need more capital coming into the space as well to really make an impact on that transition.
Somewhat philosophical question for you. If energy is provided by the government almost for free or for very cheap, why isn't it the same with housing? Because it seems that to me, it's all of that is a bubble. Real estate, it's just humans capsizing on false prices. Like in the end, I think we could potentially pay for $500 house. So obviously there's market forces and paying for material, paying for humans. I do think that bots will somewhat change that, but I think humans need houses first before they can get energy. Is it just because it's way cheaper to produce energy? And I guess the answer to that is somewhat yes. And because the price is cheap, right? It's mostly petroleum and fossil fuels that's been burned. The price to pay is later on. It's for generations down the line that we've already started paying for that, right? With forest fires and climate change and all that bullshit. So that's a large and philosophical question, but what is your 2 cents on?
Yeah, I don't think that the governments of the world will ever be in a position where they're providing free access to energy. I don't think that's ever going to be a thing where, they're just providing this as a baseline service. There's way too much money and capital in the space for that to happen. What I believe will happen is there will be this long transition of where today, if you own a home or you rent an apartment, your energy comes from your local utility. I think that as time progresses, what's going to change is that more and more people are going to have the option to essentially have their own energy independence, where they could go out on their own dime and purchase an energy system which could power their home or power their community, and that be much more decentralized than what we have today, where people can get a sense of freedom and independence rather than getting a bill in the month every month from their local utility. That's a set rate that's controlled by the utility. They have no say in it, and they need that to live their life. So that transition, I do think, will take place. How long that will take is unknown.
So that utility company, I'm this entrepreneur, I buy the equipment to build this power grid, which must require humongous capital. I put the electrical wires down the ground or up ground, depending when and where. And then I deal with the government. What's the dealio here? What's the economics?
Yeah, so I'm saying that you would actually own the equipment. So just like you purchase, say, like a Tesla Powerwall, put it in your house, and that would be storage for if you have solar. Systems like that are not solar, that are sustainable, either they're microreactors or they're new types of generator technologies that can provide energy production on demand at the site of consumption, which would allow energy to be placed much more decentrally. Think about microgrids in communities, manufacturing facilities having their own on-site power generation. That will still be connected to the grid in some capacity, but those people have the control over that system and how they are generating their electricity, the cost of generating that electricity. And that's, is a government regulated thing, but ultimately the government is not going to tell them what to do as a person that owns that source. So I'm just speaking from a place of that. Today we have a very centralized grid, which has its own risks because it is central. So if a grid goes down, we have problems. What I'm saying is that eventually what's going to happen is there will be this next layer that's built on top of that grid that is decentralized, where you have many forms of power generation across that grid, which will make it more resilient, will lower costs, but it'll allow the people that have those systems to be essentially independent, to be in control of their life, their energy consumption, and the price they pay to do so.
Right. And I can picture that. I'm just trying to model the old model, right? So coming back to this, I'm this 60, 75-year-old guy. I built this company like 30 years ago, and I sell a price per kilowatt, I guess. And this is paid by the municipality, the government, right? And they retail the price at a lower price to the citizen. They cover 50% of it. Is that the model?
Not necessarily, no. I guess I'm trying to understand exactly the question that
Well, it's just like how energy is sold nowadays, right? I guess most people don't understand how if you're the owner of a power grid, how that works. I guess it's request for proposals, right? That's where it starts. Okay, we're this new municipality, and then we're gonna have these 5 companies bid, and 2 of them are gonna come up with the systems, right? And when they do, they will have a price per kilowatt. They will include all the maintenance costs and so forth. So it's somewhat of a public system, right? So if I'm the owner of this grid, I'm private, right? I make somewhat good money, I guess, out of that. And the government will also pay me some profits on the kilowatt, and the municipality will redistribute the energy at a cheaper cost, is my guess. I don't think they bill the whole cost of the energy straight up to the citizen. I do think they have a deal to lighten that bill. Is that correct?
it's different in every utility company.
Okay.
So, in other countries, it's a different set of parameters and regulations and cost structures, cost sharing structures. So
Right.
it depends where you are in the world.
But it's very much of a duopoly, I could imagine, not like a monopoly or an oligarchy. It's like 3 companies having 3 power grids for this municipality of 30K citizens, for example, right?
Yes, it's very much a monopolized thing.
Right. So what you're telling here, like how you see that, is being kind of a software in between to calculate and redistribute in a smarter way, and doing potentially some deals with these municipality and the owner of the grid, and or having more of these grids built in a more efficient manner, right?
I think for someone in the position that is in charge or in control of a grid, they would generally see what I'm talking about, this transition, as something to be afraid of. But I think that is just a sheer lack of understanding of that concept of decentralization. Because the reality is right now, if I own a grid, I am predicated on 2 things: distribution and generation. And most all generation for a grid is very centralized in one location. So if I have a transmission line go down, you can have whole communities that are without power, especially with this disparity of how much power we're using. It's even difficult to get enough power to certain locations. So what these companies and these utilities need to start thinking about is, how do we create grid resiliency? Well, really the only way to do that is to start to decentralize where those sources of energy are. So it's actually a very positive thing for people that are in control of these grids, because right now their problems that they're facing, they cannot solve on their current path and trajectory. They need to think about, how do we create more microgrids? How do we adopt these more affordable sources of energy? I mean, the utility could even be the customer of these same sources and work with their customer base to be applying these systems on their grid to make it more resilient, make it less expensive. And ultimately, it's more profitable for them to do the right thing then. So I do think there needs to be support from these, I guess, quote unquote, monopolies in the business. And I do see that happening. I talk to lots of utilities, I talk to lots of oil companies. And from what I've seen across the board, is we're kind of entering this new window of opportunity where these companies are beginning to understand that we do need to achieve a sustainable future, and they are trying to participate in that. Many of them don't know how to accomplish that, which is where I think, again, more people need to be coming into the space, building solutions that can be adopted by both the consumer side and both the large conglomerate side. So it's going to take everybody working together as much as possible. And I do feel like for the first time that many of these utilities and these larger oil companies are taking it seriously. They're trying to do the right thing. But what it comes down to is, can we do the right thing and do that in a logical way that makes sense for us, and also isn't going to affect their bottom line? Also, obviously, they're a business, they have to make money, but they need to have all those together and their boxes all checked to really be able to participate in creating a better future.
Yeah, it's fascinating business model, and I guess we need to do around too, because yeah, there's being efficient on generating that energy at a cheaper cost for these companies, and then the other side of the funnel, I guess if there's just more population, more inhabitants, they'll make more money. That's the only way my brain can come up with. I'm pretty sure you've got like other revenue innovation for them, or just disparage the energy more efficiently with software and so forth. Yeah, there's probably tons of rooms for innovation. I'd like to talk about that, and dealing with municipalities and government for next podcast. Where can people find out more about you until then, Hunter?
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody can find me on LinkedIn. I'm most accessible and available on there, just at Hunter Bjork. And pretty much all my links to everything else is there available on LinkedIn.